Now, I'm not saying that DK Metcalf is a bust, because he'll probably find me and hurt me because he's a large man. So let's just talk about why he's most likely going to be a bust. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom Grossi, and today, as we continue the journey on the road to the 2019 NFL Draft, we take a look at one of the combine darlings that's got people in a tizzy. Lots of people are projecting to be the first wide receiver off the board, and that is Mr. DK Metcalf. Before we get to that, a big thank you to all those who purchased their Packcast merch at bonfire.com/Packcast. That will be shipped out, or starting to be shipped out, April 8th. So big thank you to everyone who supported me in that, and I hope you enjoy the merch. Also, a big shout out and thank you to the growing list of patrons that we have over on patreon.com/Tom Grossi Comedy. Check that out for some cool rewards. Now, let's get into the tale of the tape here. Now, let's start where this all began, where all the frenzy mania began at the NFL Combine, where DK Metcalf ran a 4.33 40-yard dash. And he's a big boy, 228 pounds at 6'3", and people were like, oh, hot a damn. And DK Metcalf went from, oh yeah, he's probably going to be a pretty good receiver, to, oh damn, he's going to be the first receiver off the board. Did 27 reps, right? And the bench press has a 40.5 vertical. All very, very impressive stuff. And so his name started going everywhere. I've seen him draft within the top 10, but usually he's going anywhere between 10 and 20. But the consensus is he is the best wide receiver in the draft after the combine. And not only do I not agree with that, but I think that this guy in particular, out of all the guys I've looked at thus far, has the biggest potential to be a bust. And I'm going to explain to you why today. Now, before we get into some highlights and all that great stuff, let's take a look at some stats. In 2016, he only played 2 games, and then he broke his foot. And so he was like, nay, let's get a mulligan and do that over. And then so in 2017, he played 12 games, had 39 receptions, 646 yards, 7 touchdowns with an average of 16.6 yards per catch. Then in 2018, he played 7 games, had 26 receptions, 569 yards, 5 touchdowns with an average of 21.9 yards per catch, and then had a season-ending neck injury. And so let me get this out of the way first, and let's address the elephant in the room, besides he's him, because he's big. Though I wouldn't say he was an elephant, maybe like a Yeti. Let's get the tangibles out of the way, the positives first, right? His height makes him a matchup nightmare, right? He obviously has great speed, as proven not only throughout his career in college football, but also at the combine. He can be that wide receiver that you just throw the ball up to. He has that concentration. He's difficult to tackle down because of his size. And so these are all good things. And when you look at his highlights, you're like, oh man, like this guy could be a difference maker, right? This is a guy that sets you apart because there's so few wide receivers that have his size, that have his speed, and he makes him like that kind of athletic monster. And as I was looking at his highlights, one thing stood out in particular, and it was the kind of routes that he was running. And as you can see, the majority of the routes that he actually is doing are just go routes. He's the kind of guy where you just say, hey, DK, just run as fast as you can in a straight line. And he goes, and he does that very, very well. Especially if he gets off quick off the line, he's able to burst past any defender, any cornerback, and especially if you don't have a safety on him, he's gone. And you see that over and over and over again, him literally just running in a straight line, catching the ball. And so if there's a wide receiver that he reminds me of the most, some people were making the comparison to Alshon Jeffrey, but I gotta be completely honest, even though he is bigger, the guy he reminds me the most of is Mike Wallace, the old Pittsburgh and Dolphins wide receiver. in that he also ran a 4.33 at the 40-yard dash, and that was his go-to. He literally was, I'm going to run in a straight line as fast as I can. That worked with Pittsburgh. It didn't do anything with Miami. But the reason why it worked with Pittsburgh is because he wasn't their number one receiver. Just like DK Metcalf is not Ole Miss's number one receiver. That would be A.J. Brown. And so I think that a lot of his productivity, which we'll get to that in a second, is due to the fact that they already had a number one receiver, and since they're constantly doubling A.J. Brown, that's why DK Metcalf is able to get open so many times. And listen, he is a red zone threat, right? He's able to get up there. There's lots of fades that are thrown in the back of the end zone. Goes and fades. That's essentially his two main routes, in which it's not pretty how he gets open, if he is open. It's literally like, I'm going to throw this ball up, and he's a very large man, so he can go and he can get it. But that brings me to the fact that this man cannot run a route. Nay. No route running whatsoever. And what's more concerning than just that is that he's really, really slow off of his breaks. And that's not even just from the footage that you could take a look at. That's also the fact that his combine stats, right? His shuttle ran 4.5, which was the fourth worst for wide receivers. His 3-cone was 7.38, which is the third worst for wide receivers. He doesn't have quick feet. His comeback routes, he's going to be screwed every time that he has to do that. If they put a safety on him, he's essentially not going to be able to run those go routes, and he's going to be in trouble, and he's going to have to fight for the ball, which you think he would do more of considering his size and his tangibles, but that's just not happening a whole lot. So you'll see, for example, like the game against LSU, right, where he's going against another guy we talked about, Greedy Williams, right? He was essentially blanketed this entire time, and when he had to fight for the ball, he wasn't really successful. In addition, he had the offensive pass interference on him as well. Now, there are some times, like, he did make a good contested catch, but there's also other times where he was, quote-unquote, blocking, which really wasn't so great at all. Basically, if he can't run a go route or doesn't have any opening whatsoever, it's going to be difficult for him to catch the ball. I think this guy completely relies totally on his speed and his size, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but technically, it's abysmal. And I don't think that this is going to translate, really well as a number one wide receiver, which if you're going to draft him in the first round, you have to think that he's going to be your number one, especially if you're talking within the top 15. I think that this guy is going to not work out as anybody's number one because they are just going to put two guys on him, and he's basically going to be completely shut down. Now, talking about his productivity, right? The fact that this guy has only played 21 games in his entire college career, that's problematic, and we're talking about drafting him in the first round. Talk about this. In 2017, he had one 8-catch game with an average of 3.25 catches a game. Not really that impressive. And then in 2018, he had one game that was 7 catches, but he had an average of 3.7 catches per game. So this is what I'm talking about, is that the productivity and the numbers really aren't there. So while some of the highlights are super duper impressive and you see him going up there and being able to drag it down and beating people off the line and constantly getting open, like that's great. That's all well and good. I'm not saying that there isn't talent there because you'd be stupid to say there's no talent there. So what I'm saying is that this guy's talent is really just based off of his size. And once you have cornerbacks that could be more aggressive with him, or you have NFL caliber players that are going to be able to figure him out really quickly, I think he's completely done. And again, I don't think he serves well as anybody's number one wide receiver, which is why for the Packers, no. And while you could make the argument that, yeah, then you'll have Devontae Adams getting open more if they're going to have to double him, that's not where you take first-round players. If you're drafting someone within the top 15, you're expecting them to be basically a day one starter and to put up a lot of productivity on your team. I don't see him doing that. I don't see you drafting him. Even, for example, like the Cardinals, I've seen him mocked going to the Cardinals. Like, they got Christian Kirk last year to help out, who will eventually be their new quarterback, which will be Kyler Murray. But here, when you're talking about Metcalf, I feel like he could be a solid number 2, but he's going to be the Mike Wallace kind of guy. He's going to be the guy who says, run really fast. If you're open, I'm going to throw you the ball, and, hopefully you catch it. Throw those 50-50 balls, and we'll see what happens. And so when people are talking about Green Bay picking him up, I'm just not seeing it. I'm just seeing a raw talent that not only needs a lot of work when it comes to his route running, but I kind of see like a one-trick pony here. The fact that, again, it's just go routes and fades. That's not going to cut it in the NFL. And so if it was up to me, I don't touch this guy in the first round. I think if he had anything less than the combine that he put in when it came to his 40-yard dash that everybody is swooning over, I don't think he's even a first-round guy. I think he's maybe a second-round guy. And again, I think you're reaching. I think that A.J. Brown, his teammate, is a much more well-put-together wide receiver who we're going to talk about next week. But for the Green Bay Packers, I say no, not at 12, not at 30. There's lots of other options there. I think that he is going to be reached for. I think there is going to be a team that is going to draft him within the top 15. And again, I'm not saying he's going to be a bust, but a lot of signs are pointing to it. The tape, again, while some of those catches look really impressive and his speed is very impressive, I think the fact that he doesn't know how to run a route, and that's not completely his fault considering he's only played 21 games, that's not someone you pick in the first round. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com, TomGrossiComedy, Comedy, at TomGrossiComedy on all the social medias and stuff like that you see below. Check out Packcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, and of course here on YouTube. We're doing this 5 days a week until the draft or until I die. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.